You can probably see it expanding as I push up on the compression stroke. There's a lot of like small air bubbles in the syringe right here. Air volume reducers. Hi, another one. We're gonna do something really easy today. We're gonna rebuild a fork, and the beauty of this job is all you need are these couple tools to make this happen. Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. You need way more than that. You really need this stuff, as well as a couple other things that I'm surely forgetting, but that's gonna get us started. So, what we're gonna do is what we typically do when a fork comes into the shop. We're going to function test to see the way it is, so before we tear it down, I kind of know what I'm working with. And then we're gonna do a lower service, air spring service, and change the oil in a damper, I think. That's assuming we don't find anything funky inside the fork. The first thing I do is just come over to the bike. I just want to see if there's any funny noises, which you can't do with a ticket on there. So we're rebounding really fast on this guy, so I'm gonna see 6 clicks. I'm gonna see if that actually slows down, which it does. Okay, and it's consistent, so I know we're at 6, so I know I'm good in there. And then, do we have lockout? Yes, these forks don't lock out solid, so that's working as prescribed. So once I've function test and know that things are working the way they're supposed to, which is good. You don't want trouble with your stuff. You don't want to wait until something's going clunk or leaking oil, because by then these things turn into a gigantic can of worms that is sometimes really expensive and sometimes impossible to fix. The next thing I'll do is just kind of give it a quick check for condition of stanchions, because we don't want any major scratches on these things. You really don't want any scratches on these things, but you definitely don't want major scratches. And as a general rule of thumb at the store, we tend to do this, which is something that you should be doing after every ride anyhow, to get the tops of these seals nice and clean. And I like to get this guy kind of clean before we tear stuff apart, just so I don't have to clean up extra guck that falls down inside the fork as we tear it down. So this is a several generations old RockShox PIKE. Again, we're going to pull the lowers off this thing. I'm going to show you what we do inside there on a regular basis. We're going to pull the damper out of this thing, drain the oil. If the oil looks pretty normal, that's as far as I'm going to go. If we do a damper rebuild on this thing, you guys are going to need a bag of popcorn and some sodas, because it's going to take a while. And then we're going to pull the air spring out and re-grease, probably. Inspect, clean up, inspect, re-grease, put back together. So, I'm going to get some more supplies. Generally what you need is in this pile right here. I don't know if we already got that. Again, you need some other stuff too, but this kind of gets you gone. So we're going to grab some stuff and get started. Okay, we won't be sitting down for this job. Okay, so after dropping everything that you can possibly drop, we're going to check baseline air pressure on what this customer has, because it certainly felt okay for their weight, or their assumed weight. And we're looking at 55, the old double nickel air pressure. We're going to make a note of that. So we got a 5.5 for the air pressure. Low speed compression, 1, 2, 3, 4, and rebound, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 on the rebound. Okay, so first line of business is taking the lowers off of the fork, which requires draining a little bit of lowers oil in here. Later in the video, you're going to see why this job is pretty important, because the amount of oil in the lowers in this particular fork, and a lot of these forks, is kind of pathetic. This one gets 10 cc's per leg, which is not a lot of lubricating oil for the precious bushings and such that are floating around. So we take the 5mm Allen wrench, break some stud nuts loose, which you guys can't see. This is the secret part of the series here. And tap these to break the seal. Okay. So we let the lowers oil drain a little bit. While that's happening, I'm going to take the damper cartridge out of the fork. Mostly because this damper takes a little while to bleed. So I like to get a head start on doing that. Okay. So damper cartridge. This is kind of the brains of the operation. This is what controls your stored energy and movement inside the fork or shock. But this is a fork. First thing I'm going to check is this bladder. This bladder displaces the oil when the rebound shaft goes up into the cartridge body. Oil needs to go somewhere because you're putting more stuff in there, and it goes into that body. The bladder, you can probably see it expanding as I push up on the compression stroke. This expands out a little bit to capture the oil, and then as you rebound stroke, this returns to normal rate. And I like to load that and give it a couple squeezes and make sure that there are no pinholes or anything else going on in the bladder. These things hold quite a bit of oil. It's been 3 years since this particular bike's been serviced according to our records, so if it was a year, I probably wouldn't do the oil change in the damper. I'd probably save the customer some money and let this ride until next year, but I'd do the lower service in the air spring, which we're going to get into here in a little bit. But we're going to change oil in the damper, and on this particular one, you got to pull some stuff out of the top of this, purge the oil, and then refill, letting all the bubbles come to the top. So that's what we're going to do now. So on this guy, you need to remove the low speed compression adjuster. I told you we'd need more tools. There it is. That comes out of there like so. Okay, so there's the compression needle. So that guy monitors your low speed compression. We're not getting into the science a whole lot of that just at the moment. That'll be another video. Okay, so purging out the old oil. And while I'm doing this, I'm looking for metal chunks. You kind of know if there's metal chunks. The fork's typically blown up by the time there's metal in there, but just any kind of dirty oil or funny bits going on in there, and this looks good, which is what you want. You don't want this oil to look bad coming out of there. If it looks bad, you have ruined parts in there to some extent. And then we start tearing dampers down, and that's when stuff starts to get into the hundreds of dollars for just these units. So, okay, we're gonna take our bleed syringe, we're gonna plumb into here to make sure that our high speed compression circuit is open. There's another tool I forgot you'll need. So you only need about $1,000 worth of tools to rebuild this fork. That's the beauty of this whole thing. And then I know that in this particular fork, this thing receives 3-weight oil, and RockShox uses Maxima fluids, which I think are really good. And the basic goal here is to just purge out the air that is in the damper after we drain the oil out. So this takes a while. So I like to kind of do this gravity bleed for a little bit, and then I'll hook a syringe up to this thing later, and it'll help me get the last couple percent of air out of there a little faster. Oh, it's a geyser. I don't know if you can see them, but there's a lot of like small air bubbles in the syringe right here. That's no bueno. It happens. You can't avoid it really, but what you want to be careful of is that you wouldn't want to finish this process off right now, because these bubbles in here that look like a really nice glass of ale it's not what you want inside your damper. Inside the damper you want pure, just a column of oil, no air. You don't want any air in there at all. Back to the lowers part of this deal. This is lowers. On RockShox stuff, at the store we tend to pull the bottom out bumpers, which I'm going to show you here in a minute. We tend to pull the bottom out bumpers out of these forks because they don't sit down on the bottom of the fork like they do in RockShox forks. So that foam ring, I should have showed you that. Inside your fork, the dust wiper, which you guys are like, yeah, I know what that is. This foam ring sits underneath the dust wiper in your fork. This foam ring's job is to hold oil and keep the seal lubricated. And we use these foam rings to... Can we see that? Can you guys see that? That thing's dirty. There's some clean ones in the bag. So I use this as kind of an indicator of what's the health of the fork. And again, it's been a couple, 2-3 years since this thing's had service, so this is not that rad when we're thinking about what the living conditions are inside the lowers of this thing. So I made this tool to help get the bottom out bumpers out of the fork, and it's not perfect, but it does work. So that is a bottom out bumper in a RockShox fork. It's got some sort of hard plastic on the bottom, and underneath in this fork there's a bunch of fins that this guy sits on, and the oil in the lowers lays underneath those fins, and that's why we take these out, so we can really get all the oil, all the dirty lowers oil out of there. Again, on Fox, they tend to sit down into the bottom of the fork, and sometimes we take them out, sometimes we don't. Depends on the condition of the foam wipers. If I pull the fork apart and see really dirty foam wipers in there, I'll pull the bottom out bumpers out of a Fox as well. Paper towels, and we jam those into the bottom of the lowers, and then I hang this fork upside down for the half hour or so that the rest of the fork service takes. We'll come back to the damper. I got nice column of oil, 0 air bubbles in there. There's just a couple more air bubbles, kind of pretty good with the damper having no air in it. So what I'll do to fast track this system is I'll get all the oil out of the syringe, I'll plumb that back in, and now as I go through a compression stroke on the rebound shaft, I'm going to pull up slightly on the damper and just try to coax the last little bit of air out of that damper. So there's a lot of little bubbles, like a glass of beer, so I'm going to let that just kind of do its thing, let the air come to the top. I'll do a little bit of visual inspection inside the tube, which doesn't really mean a lot on this damper side because the inside of the tube, almost nothing happens in there. I will kind of clean it up a little bit, like so. That all looks normal in there. No bends, no funny business. Before I go tearing the air spring out of here, I'm going to let the air out. Okay. Air volume reducers. There's a circlip holding the bottom of the air spring together, and we're going to remove that. Okay, Air spring, air spring. Grease doesn't look too bad, but there's a little dirt in there. So this is good. I mean, the timing on the rebuild of this, that was down in the negative air chamber. This is up on the positive yet. So again, like seeing that, like the service interval on this fork is pretty good. Probably could have been timed a little sooner, but this is okay. On the air side, it's critical that this thing be really clean, 100% scratch free. So we have a healthy environment for our seals. And that looks good. We're going to clean the air spring up a little bit. Air spring assembly. So, fun fact that this is your main air seal. This is the bottom seal head in the air spring assembly. Between these 2 points is where your negative air lives. It auto loads when you inflate your fork or shock. And at some point in time, we're going to describe how this works and what it does inside a fork or shock. There's a seal inside here, so we want to make sure this air shaft is scratch free. All the anodization looks really good and even, and this fork didn't come in with issues, so I wouldn't expect any issues moving forward, and things look good. So take our beloved Slick Honey. I'm gonna put just a little bit on that air shaft. And what I'm going to do up on the main seal is kind of pile it. And the theory here, as the air shaft is getting driven up into the compression stroke, the oil or the grease will kind of separate and ooze down over the seal, and always kind of keep some good looking grease in there. It's what we did last time we rebuilt this, and judging by what I was just seeing there a couple minutes ago, things are looking pretty good. I'm going to take just a little more Slick Honey and pop it down inside there, inside the stanchion, and then we're just going to reverse order. So make sure we got our square edge side of the snap rings. This snap ring is what holds your life together in this fork, so it's really important that if you guys are going to do this, understand that there's a rounded side and a machine flat edge side of the snap ring, and the machine edge side of the snap ring should be oriented to where all your load is getting loaded into, to ensure that it sits in the super tiny groove that this thing lives in and kind of keeps the fork together. It's beyond important that you do that. So I don't like leaving the air systems open too long on these things, so we're going to put the air cap back on top of the fork. We'll air it back up because while I'm doing stuff with the air side, why not? Okay, so back to tamper cartridge. Okay, so still air. Still air. That's why I tend to start with the dampers in this. The newer versions of these things are way easier to do. So we'll go back to lowers while that does its thing. There's no rushing this process. If you rush this process, you're going to fail. The fork's going to feel like poo. We've got our paper towels shoved in there. Just along something. Get those paper towels. Okay. Paper towel, paper towel. I'll use those for something else. Down on the bottom of the lowers, I see some guck in there. Okay, so what I'm doing now is inspecting the bushings that are pressed inside the lowers casting. There's a bushing here and about here that the stanchion rides up and down on as it goes through the compression stroke, and you want those things to look perfect. Okay, still air. If you're smarter than me in the front of this process, you would have taken your foam rings and put them on something and had them soaking in whatever fluid is going to go in your lowers. In this one, it's Plush Light from Maxima. That's the lowers juice in this particular fork. Put the bottom out bumpers back in, so kind of force it through the first bushing. We use a helper tool to get it set through the second. This piece of PVC piping, I forget the size, but it fits perfect down in here to set the lowers, the bottom out bumpers into the bottom of the fork. Let's see how our foam rings are doing. Okay, so this is like phase 6 of getting the air out of this damper again. That's why this particular generation of damper is really hard to bleed. That's why I always start with this, because it takes forever. I can almost do the rest of the fork in the amount of time it takes me to do the damper. So we've got our bottom out bumpers into the lowers. I got foam rings that I've put in there. We're going to take the dust wipers, what most people are going to call a seal, and load them onto the installation tool here, and we're just going to press until we're flush with the top of the casting, and we're going to hold that there for just a few seconds so the bushing, or so the seal doesn't creep back out on us. And these things usually require that you pull this seal spring off. So again, pressing and holding. And the nice thing with these install tools is this exactly fits those bushings down in there, so the seal has to sit flat. It can't get put in there crooked at all. So we're done with that. We'll pop the seal springs back on. For us, these seals come pre-greased from the factory, but I actually don't think it's that good of a job. The grease tends to feel pretty dry in there. So dry grease is usually not synonymous with buttery feeling forks. So we tend to wipe that factory installed grease out of there and then take some fresh slick honey and put a little bit in there, and just a nice light coating inside the seals. So cleanliness is godliness in rebuild, so we're gonna clean this up. Not that I can't do it after the fact, but this is easier to get into these nooks and crannies like this. New sag ring, which may or may not matter depending on what you're doing, but we're gonna throw that on nice and bright and shiny. Come back to our damper assembly. Okay, we are well within 1% of being good on this damper. Okay, so things sound good in here, and I'm getting almost no air bubbles out of the cartridge anymore. So I'm going to let these last little bits just float to the top. Once they do, I'm going to pull the syringe off there and cap off our system so it's sealed. We're going to charge the system. So I've fully extended the rebound damper shaft inside the cartridge. I know the system's totally full oil. We're going to pull our syringe out with 3-weight, pop that back in the container, and put this away for another day. So we take our compression, low speed compression needle, and we will gingerly put that guy back in there, all the way down so I know it's engaging, and I'm going to come back up so I can actually get the damper bled. I'm going to take my, I don't know what they call this, I'm going to call it an adjuster post. I'm going to make sure that we are engaged. It's clicking the way that it clicks inside the fork. There's oil pulled up on here. I can't see where my circlip goes. I'm going to dump that out. And then we're going to put our circlip in, much like the one in the bottom of the air spring. It does have a working side. The pressures in this aren't quite as high as what the air system is, but just as a general practice, you're always putting the machine side against the forces. Okay, so boom. Now, it's really hard to get all this oil out of here. The problem with this is you put the knobs back on here, right? And after some time, the oil squeaks out of here. Maybe it's on a roof rack on your car at 60 miles an hour on the highway, and the oil comes out of here, and then all of a sudden you think you got a problem when in actuality you don't. So I like to clean these up a little bit. Toothbrush action. Okay, we're gonna air gun this out just a little bit. Oh yeah. No squishy sounds. Everything feels consistent, compression and rebound. So this thing's ready to go. Into the stanchion with you. Hi, Brad.
Hi, Greg.
Okay, so we're gonna tighten the damper back down. For the clocking on this, what I'm gonna do is you guys probably can't see this, but all I'm doing is I'm taking the compression adjust and putting it all the way to the right. I've got a little thing of grease in there. I'm going to put this so it's in the locked out position. The step ensures that the lockout knob is indeed locked out, or as much as it can be on this fork. Okay, so we got open. We got pedaling platform, and we got locked out. Okay, so we got the damper assembly back in the bike, the air spring assembly's back in the bike, fully charged with air, just the way it was, 55 PSI, and we just got to put the lowers back on. So, stud nuts, base nuts, I'm gonna call them bolts, because that's what they are, they're bolts. But all the all the lowers, bolts or nuts that hold stuff on, use these plastic compression washers, and they're different depending on what you got. This is for the damper side. These are pretty important. They call them crush washers. These are pretty important to be using new ones of these every time, because as you torque the bolt, the compression washer's job is to smush a little bit and ensure that you've got the right torque and tension on all your stuff inside, and that the fork stays together. The torque on this stuff is generally really low. These are aluminum bolts going into aluminum parts inside a casted aluminum lower, so you don't want to get stuff that tight. Again, if you're doing this yourself, go to manufacturer's website, buy a torque wrench. So that would be tool number 782. You'll need to do this and make sure it's done right, because a lot can go wrong. If these nuts break or fall out because they're improperly spec'd, bad stuff will happen. It's almost a guarantee. So we're going to slide our lowers back on. We're going to ensure that the seals, or what are called dust wipers, are looking the way they're supposed to look, and I didn't fold any of those seal lips over when I loaded the lowers onto the stanchions. We're going to take 20 cc's of lowers fluid, and we're going to inject 10 cc's per side. So there's that, and there's that one. Okay, so we've got compression side, and we've got air side. Okay, so from this point forward, you put your front brake back on, front wheel back on, obviously, unless you're really good at riding wheelies. One thing I'm going to show you guys on the brake caliper mounting hardware. This is, if you learn anything in this video, this is the one. I like to put just an ultra thin layer of grease on the between the washer and the head of the bolt. And I do this because as you are tightening the caliper mount hardware down, this will help ensure that the seating hardware, these convex and concave washers, it'll ensure that these guys don't get turned because of the friction between the bolt and the hardware, and it will make it a lot easier to get your caliper centered over the rotor so things don't rub. And that's something that you can obviously do just when you're doing general brake stuff. So without further ado, we got our caliper adapter. We're going to take our bolts and our wrench, and we're going to get the caliper put back on. Now, if you're getting ready to sign off because you know how to put a front brake back on, you're sick of listening to me, if you guys want to drop something down in the comment line, let me know what we're missing from this video or what you want to see next, and by darn, we'll make it happen. I am putting the front wheel on and centering the caliper away from success. However, this bike's getting a ton of other stuff. Tune, brake pads, a rear shock rebuild, yada yada. So, thanks for coming by. See you next time.